All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Accuracy in America. I'm Don Irvine, your host. I'm joined today by my special guest, Cheryl Chumley, who has been on with me before. It's been a little while. She actually used to take a long drive out to my house pre-pandemic, but now we can do this in the comfort of our own homes. Cheryl's the online opinion editor for the Washington Times. Welcome, Cheryl.
Hey, it's great to be with you, Don. So happy to chat again.
Yeah, it's been a while, like I said. All right. So it's always hard to I wanted to just hone in on a few issues, but there's a gazillion out there, always seems, in the news that are going on out there. But let's just start off. I just want to get some of your feedback and your feelings about these shootings that have taken place here in Atlanta and in Boulder, Colorado. Obviously tragic, to have happen. But one of the things that has, bothers me is that every time we have this, whether or not it's a Columbine or whether, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and we can go through a long list of things that have happened in this country, is that the liberals, particularly, the Democrats, they use this as their cudgel to try to force gun control and ban guns, ban assault weapons, et cetera, as they think that this is their moment. I mean, what is, from your vantage point, what are you seeing? What's your opinion here on this?
Well, I think the left and the media, which is kind of saying the same thing, really, has done a disservice to the American public by doing this rush to judgment to further their own narrative about both these shootings. If you look at what the Atlanta one, where the suspect was arrested and he claimed that he had a sex addiction, and that's what drove him to do these shootings. And 6 of the 8 victims there were Asian. The other 2, the media always conveniently leaves out, were white, a white male and a white female. And they leave that out because it doesn't meet their narrative. And the narrative with that Atlanta shooting was that Donald Trump actually sparked racism against Asians by calling the coronavirus the Wuhan virus. And they want to paint the fan base of Donald Trump with this broad brush of being deplorable racist. And this plays into the narrative. So that's why we saw that in Atlanta, that the media had to rush to judgment and paint this as a hate crime against Asians purposefully. And now with Colorado, we see the rush to judgment coming out there, that it was a white male who just went on this rampage and killed 10 people, including an officer. Well, it turns out all the victims were white, and the suspect is not exactly white. He's from Syria, Muslim. He has a long history of anger and anti-Trumpism, and he even has an arrest record, so he's not exactly an unknown. So again, this is the left's narrative that they're trying to push, that it's white males in America who are the biggest danger right now, the racist white males. And they conveniently forget that there's a whole faction out there that of the Muslim, the Islam terrorism is still very alive and well, and they don't want to deal with that type of narrative. So to me, that's along with the gun control, that's the bigger issue that's going on here.
Yeah, good points here. I'll work back on this. So on the Boulder thing too, was it not Vice President Harris's niece? Didn't she tweet out initially? Kind of just labeled this as this white shooter, and then she had to backtrack on this. That she did rush to judgment. She just, this knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, it's going to be a white person, I'm just going to put it out there, and she winds up with egg all over her face. But it just seems to be that liberal, that liberal reaction. It's like, oh, it's got to be a white person that's shooting all these people with a gun.
She actually said that white males were the biggest threat to America right now. So, and you're right, the tweet was deleted. They had to rush back. But here comes the gun control right on cue.
Yeah, and the Democrats are making a huge push on this. There's even talk, I guess, that with President Biden, that he might issue an executive order to do something about this. I guess if he can't get this done legislatively through Congress, that he'll just go ahead and write it in there for the time that he's in office, which would be a terrible infringement upon our rights as Americans to own guns for those that choose to do so.
Right, because when the Democrats taught gun reform, they paint it as if it's common sense gun control. But what it is basically is taking guns out of the hands of law-abiding American citizens. It does nothing to address the criminal element, the gang element, the thug element, or even the mental the mental illness that goes along with much of these shootings. And this is what Democrats basically live for. They wait for a mass shooting like this in order to further gun control designs that they have in the first place. A lot of Democrats dislike the Second Amendment, and they would like us to go the way of Europe or Australia and just cede all our guns to the government and rely on police to protect us. And it's very hypocritical, because if you look at these Democrats that call for gun control, they have armed security around them 24/7. And look up at Capitol Hill right now, military surrounding them. So Democrats, it's do as I say, but not as I do. And on the Second Amendment, Americans thankfully stand strong on this and really push back.
Yeah, and for gun control, for all of that is done, I mean, we can look at a lot of liberal cities, liberally run cities, where they have very strict gun control measures, but it hasn't stopped gun crime, gun violence, right?
No, and books have been written about this. Honestly, the cat's out of the bag on this. Just taking guns away from law-abiding American citizens, stat after stat, study after study, analysis after analysis shows it does not reduce gun-related crimes in the communities, because they're not addressing the actual root of the gun violence in certain communities. And it's the communities that are run by Democrats. They turn blind eyes to the gun violence that happens under their watch. And meanwhile, they go out on campaign trails and before the media and talk about common sense gun control and throw out terms like assault weapons, which God knows what that means. There is no such thing as an assault weapon per se that you can put in a piece of legislation and prohibit. You have to detail exactly what caliber weapon you're talking about. But a lot of this messaging gets through to low information voters, and they go out and they just repeat these talking points. But seriously, the Second Amendment was put in place because it's a God-given right to defend self and family. It's not about hunting. It's not about putting food on the table. It's about the right to self-defense.
Right, and as I recall, I think John Lott, didn't he wrote did he write a book or talked about a city in Georgia that was, I mean, they had almost virtually 100% gun ownership. As a result, there was no crime. There was no gun crime to speak of, right? And so he was showing kind of the other side of it, is that, I mean, if you're a criminal and you know that people are armed, why would you want to commit a crime? It's like that you have to be absolutely stupid, which some criminals are anyway. But
common sense.
Yeah, and the other thing too. I mean, you talk about Atlanta and this Asian American thing. So this makes me. I do have interest in this because my mother was Japanese. I married a Korean. So dealing with Asia always does concern me. But this whole idea that there's this huge backlash about this anti-Asian, hate crime and stuff like this. Like, as you mentioned, this whole setup for President Trump. I mean, Jen Psaki even alluded to that in one of the press conferences in terms of that it was this. That is so ridiculous to me. I mean, I grew up. Yeah, were there a few epithets thrown at me when I was a kid? Yes. Actually, mostly incorrectly, because being half Japanese, they usually called me chink. So they got the wrong country, but whatever. Kids are kids, right? I mean, this was 50 years ago plus, and things like that. But though in that day, there's a lot of those kinds of epithets being hurled about. But I've never really seen any direct thing, at me for that. Matter of fact, I think. If there's anything, there might be an anti-Asian bias for certain things in higher education, where there has been certain degrees of where the Asians that have been in colleges, universities, and have exceeded, have gotten to be I guess there's been a lot of jealousy or kind of a little bit of hatred for them for their success. But that's academic success. They deserve whatever they earn and they get. But there have been people who've been trying to take them down a few notches on that, which I find to be kind of silly as well.
Right. Honestly, I think this plays into a little bit of the snowflake culture that has taken over a lot of our public discourse in recent years, where if somebody calls somebody a bad name, that it's not just something you brush off and move on from. It becomes a national story. And then the government steps in and tries to legislate it away. And you're never going to legislate away hate in people's hearts. When you're talking about bullies, when you're talking about pointing to people who are different and calling them stereotypical names, that's all a condition of the human heart. And no matter how many laws are on the book, you're not going to take away from that. And I think we have all shared the very human condition of being bullied at one time or poked fun of or made fun of for whatever it is about us as individuals that stands out at a particular moment in time as being different from the majority that you happen to be in at the time. And that's unfortunate, but it should be a human condition to move on from it, to toughen up, learn from it perhaps, regard it as a teaching moment for those who would further the hate. But we don't need to have discussions about legislating away hate. And I don't even like the whole hate crime thing, because a crime is a crime, whatever the motive that it's committed under. That's important to understand, but it shouldn't be one crime is regarded as worse than another in terms of the motivations.
Yeah, no, that's very good. All right, let's talk just for a few minutes here about the filibuster, because that is now becoming another hot topic on the Hill, and that the Democrats seem to, several of them are trying to make a big push to abolish the filibuster. This has been talked about before the election as something that the Democrats could gain control of the Senate, and that they were going to look at doing that. Not all Democrats have been on board, and some of them apparently have flip-flopped from their position from years ago with regard to this. And I did see I guess Elizabeth Warren is now playing the race card in an effort to try to get rid of the filibuster. But what's the danger? What's going on here with the Democrats? I mean, they got rid of it for judicial nominations, and I think that came back to bite them in the butt big time. So I'm not so sure that that's a wise maneuver for them. But what do you say? What say you on this?
This is an interesting topic, because you're right. A lot of Democrats have been a little bit moderate and regarded their role in the Senate to be these kind of stopgap for the popular legislation that comes out of the House. The House, the legislators serve for 2 years, and they're kind of at the whim of the people. So they're a little bit more wishy-washy with some of the policies that they represent and bring forward in terms of bills. The Senate, they serve for 6 years. They're supposed to be the kind of cooler heads in the room. And what's happened now, if you go back in time in the early 1900s, the senators were actually appointed by the state legislatures. And the reason for that is because the lawmakers in the House represented the will of the people. The senators in the Senate were supposed to represent the will of the states' rights. And so that's all eroded. And now we have a popular vote for senators too. And so they've become a little bit more sensitive to the whims, ever-changing whims of the constituents, of the electorate. But they still serve for 6 years. So they're supposed to be kind of the cooler heads in the room. And now what you have are Democrats in power. And they are far leftist Democrats. This isn't the party of Kennedy. It's not even the party of Bill Clinton any longer. They're far leftists. They're socialists, basically. And they want to push an agenda before the next election, because they know that most Americans aren't socialists, and they're going to go out and vote Republicans into power again. So they're starting to consider that perhaps if they can get their agenda passed and do away with that 60 vote threshold, they can ram through a lot of these agenda items that they otherwise would not be able to. So I think you're going to see some of these even so-called moderate Democrats, the few that might be left, open their eyes to possibly doing the bidding on this filibuster issue. And a sign of this is Dick Durbin actually just came out and said that he would like to see, before any discussion on the filibuster, if Republicans will work with them on the floor so they can pass things while still having the 60 vote threshold in place. And what that means is it's kind of this thinly veiled threat to the Republicans saying, work with us, pass some of our things, or we're going to go ahead and do this thing on the filibuster. So wait and watch. I think this is going to be a big, dangerous time for Republicans.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I mean, as you kind of described the Senate, I mean, it's been known as as the great deliberative body. I mean, this is a chance for them because they serve for 6 years. They, at least in theory, they shouldn't be as subjected to the whims of the voters. I mean, they have more time. I can't even imagine being a congressman just because on a 2-year term, you have to spend probably about a year just running for re-election. Almost from the time you win election, you're still going to be raising money to win election, 2 years down the road. So it's almost like a never-ending battle of trying to keep in the voters' minds and trying to keep them happy, raise money and do all of that type of thing, while theoretically trying to pass some legislation. But they are supposed to be the cooler heads, the ones that can take all this stuff that the House sends them, and the House, whether or not it's a Republican or Democrat hand, sometimes there's some pretty bad bills that get there, and try to sort that out and see what really ought to become law. I mean, we saw. I mean, to the extent of going through this stimulus bill, how the Republicans, they were trying to make it at least a little bit more towards a stimulus and not just this massive giveaway. It just seemed to me though that the Republicans, now that they no longer control things, that maybe their spine is coming back on spending a little bit, that they seem to have lost for the last few years, which is good. But it's still kind of an uphill battle with the Democrats in control. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know where we're going on this. I can't. What did Biden chime in? Biden is he kind of for it? Has he really said much about it?
Well, Joe Biden, I don't know where he stands on it, because it used to be that he stood strong in keeping a 60 vote threshold. And at the same time, if you go back, he stood strong on not expanding the Supreme Court, and some of his rhetoric on that has changed since election. So Joe Biden, the thing to remember about the president is that he's not very strong as a leader. So wherever he stands today does not necessarily mean he's going to stand in that same spot tomorrow. And that, in effect, is part of the danger that Republicans have to navigate, because the Joe Biden that they may be used to working with in the Senate or as a vice president under Barack Obama, I don't think that Joe Biden is there mentally anymore. And he's basically the puppet for the far left.
Yeah, I mean, look, whatever people or anybody can say about Donald Trump and for all the things that happened under his administration, the one thing is that you knew where Donald Trump stood on issues. Yeah. he made that very, very clear. Biden has been really hard to get to. I want to throw one more thing. Well, I want to do a couple more things. One I didn't mention to you beforehand, but because it involves the press and Joe Biden, I guess it's tomorrow. He's supposed to hold his first solo press conference, correct? Is that scheduled? We haven't seen one. It'll be like, 65 days or something like that by the time that occurs? Unbelievable. I mean, what are you expecting from this?
I'm expecting it to come off as very scripted, to be honest. I just can't see Joe Biden standing up and fielding questions like Donald Trump used to. I mean, you remember Donald Trump, every time he would go to get on Air Force One, or he would cross the White House lawn to get on the helicopter, and he would just be bombarded with questions from the press. And to his great credit, he fielded them all. He would stop and he would stand there and answer questions. And that, in addition to the very public press press conferences that he held and the questions that he fielded, I just can't see Joe Biden standing up to the same sort of scrutiny. I suspect that there will be a lot of questions asked from the friendlies in the media, and perhaps not so many questions taken from the more conservative types in the media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Post, I don't even know what she's called these days. They're not an ombudsman anymore in a lot of these newspapers, but Margaret Sullivan for the Post. I mean, she kind of posits this as it's, the press has got a great responsibility for this press conference, right? They have to be just, decorum and all these kinds of things, and how they conduct themselves and stuff like that. And there's been some criticism by these liberal lefties about how the press has gone after, and this leads right into this next thing about the border crisis and how they've actually shed some light on the border crisis situation, which is making the left go kind of crazy. I mean, they don't like this light being shown on them for what's going on. That the Biden administration, refuses to call it a crisis. It's still just a surge and we have some issues or whatever, but they also want to go back and blame Donald Trump for creating the situation, which is a complete false thing. I mean, what's your take on this border crisis? Where are we going? What's going to happen here with Biden? It seems to be out of control right now.
Yeah, this is a political peril for the Democrats. And when you have members of the mainstream press like NBC sort of criticizing this administration for blocking access to Border Patrol agents for questioning and not allowing members of the press to take photographs of the inside of where these 13,000 plus, however many, we don't really know, children who are being held down there, not allowing photos of those to come out, and not allowing the general scrutiny that went forth under President Donald Trump. When you have members of even NBC News criticizing that, you have a problem on your hand as a Democrat president. And the fact that Jen Psaki first called it a crisis and then quickly backtracked, and now I think the acceptable language is challenge or something like that, it tells you that they're aware of the problem, they are aware of the optics, and they are aware of the rising political public relations disaster that they're going to have on their hands. They just don't know how to deal with it yet. Because really the only solution is to admit democratic failure and to accept and embrace policies like Donald Trump put forward. And the Democrats aren't ready to do that yet because they care more about their political hides than they do protecting and maintaining the security of our American nation.
Yeah, I mean, they've bungled this in so many ways. I mean, you've got these people, I mean, that have been coming. They kind of started, I guess, some of them right after the election. They figured, oh, there's going to be a change in policy because we can start making our way to the border. And, you have these pictures of signs where they're wearing T-shirts or holding signs with Biden, let me in, things like this. Plus this absolute, just mishandling of the COVID testing, allowing those that they tested even positive to go ahead and enter the country. And I don't think they even were sure where they know, but, we're trying to deal with COVID on our own. We've got all these people that we don't really know anything about coming over. And we're just, they're overwhelmed. They don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to handle the situation. But as you said, I mean, this is a huge political peril. And the last thing the Democrats, want to admit is that they have totally bungled this and goofed this up, and that the Trump policies are the better policies. That they should have remained in effect. By Biden basically just starting to reverse everything willy-nilly has created a situation that's become extremely untenable at the border. And I really feel for those people that live in these border towns that are just seeing these huge surges of people coming over. We're seeing the smuggling pick up. We don't really know how much more of this is going to increase the drug trafficking and other crime. This has always been one of my biggest complaints about the way things have been on the border in the past, pre-Trump in particular, was just that there's really no vetting of anybody coming over. A lot of other countries at least have some idea of who you are. We have no idea who these people are. and
Right.
what they, and we've seen crime, and the Democrats, even when these illegals commit crimes, they tried to brush that aside, or shove it under, sweep it under the rug as just a one-off, kind of like voter fraud. Oh well, there's only one instance, it's nothing. But when a Kate Steinle loses her life, that's one too many. It should never have happened. We should have done a much better job, and for the Democrats, these cities, that when they just stop cooperating with ICE and all of these things, I mean, what is this country going to turn into?
Yeah, and defund the police. And it's interesting that you mentioned Kate Steinle, because I've been saying for a very long time that it was the Kate Steinle shooting on that California pier by the illegal who had been deported, I think, up to 5 times before, and was back in the country, found the gun, and shot Kate Steinle in front of her father. It was Donald Trump who rose to national prominence campaigning, using Kate Steinle as sort of the face of Democrats' failures on the border. And this was after so many years of illegals in this country making the news for not just killings, but drunk drivings that left people injured and killed, and the crime rates from illegal communities. And I was reporting in local communities where illegal immigration in those communities was the biggest hot button issue. And so it was Donald Trump who capitalized on that and rose to the White House, basically harping on the need to secure our nation and protect our borders. And here we are again, after 4 years of Donald Trump doing that, here we are again, just almost overnight, our borders are being overrun. And Joe Biden wants to blame the previous administration. Americans are not stupid. Even before Joe Biden took over the White House, he was campaigning on the opposite Trump. He made clear, he couldn't have drawn the messaging any clearer by saying that he would be opposite Donald Trump on the border. And if you ask a lot of these people coming to America's borders right now, which mainstream media, to their credit, have done, a lot of these people are coming because they think Joe Biden is going to let them in. And the reason they didn't come before was because they thought Donald Trump wouldn't let them in. So it doesn't get any clearer than that. And I think that Democrats are really fearful that the idea of a border issue being the singular platform issue that will bring another Donald Trump-like candidate to the White House and to key spots in the House and Senate in the coming elections. And they're right. That's what the American people will do. We will vote out Democrats weak on the border and bring in Republicans strong on border controls.
Yeah, I mean that's a great answer, because I didn't think that the border issue in this particular election had been quite the same topic. It didn't rise to the level it did in 2016. Because President Trump basically had been very effective at what he'd done. I mean, well, how much more was he going to be able to do? What was he going to be able to say? But thanks to Joe Biden and the Democrats, they have revived this issue and given a chance for the Republicans to say, hey, look, I don't think we can draw a contrast on border control and immigration than the two parties right now. And with an election coming up in 2022 for the House, this sets the Republicans up pretty good, because they're pretty close now. This could be a major issue, because I just can't see Biden fixing this thing anytime soon, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, you let in all these illegals. So like you said, we don't know who they are, where they're coming from. Allow this border surge, and at the same time, take away law-abiding citizens' guns. I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen, and Republicans just have already a lock on the next election. All
right, I promised that I wasn't going to keep you too long. I think we've gone over quite a bit. We could talk forever about something. There's so much out there, but I think we'll save that for another time. We'll do this over time and talk about the issues. Cheryl, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your insight and your contributions. Great job at the Washington Times as always, and keep watching that granddaughter of yours.
Thank you, God. Thank you. God bless.
All right, we'll see you around.
Bye.
Bye-bye.